Hello, everybody. Brian Lane here with Center for Health Affairs. We have a very, very special guest and dear friend of mine today joining us for our COVID leadership series, and it's Jose Arrieta. If you don't recognize him, the former Chief Information Officer and Chief Data Officer at HHS. He brings over 17 years of expertise in technological management, innovation, policy, small business, acquisition, as well as procurement solutions. He's got deep experience in all phases around the acquisition lifecycle. He served in a variety of executive roles within the federal government as well as private industry. He's by far one of the most respected leaders in applying emerging technologies, especially around blockchain. That's where you see this guy. He's everywhere. As well as artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotic process automation, as well as data. It's an absolute privilege to have him. He's been published numerous times. Please check that out. And I want you also to know that he's also involved from an educational perspective in a variety of different university settings. He serves as the University of Virginia and Johns Hopkins University as an adjunct professor, and a couple of other universities where he's actually helping feed the minds of young students and entrepreneurs. Jose, did I miss anything there? Or should I beat the drum even louder?
No. Thank you for the kind introduction, and it's an honor to be on and spend some time with you today, Brian.
I appreciate it, Jose. And for everybody's edification, what we're going to do today is we're going to tap Jose's brain a little bit about the past, but more so about the future. And so we've got some questions and topics lined up geared around cloud database, cybersecurity, best practices, clinical trials, supply chain, of course. And then we're going to just pose the kind of the open-ended question, which I always do in all these events that we do with Bright Talk, and that is a magic wand question, and giving you kind of a platform to tell folks what you want to say. So with that, let me ask you, what are you doing now since you left HHS?
Well, other than spending as much time as I can with the kids and trying to teach them, sometimes, man, third grade math is pretty difficult. Other than that, I've been working with startups, in particular, post-quantum security startup, a supercomputer startup focused on computational capabilities that are unrivaled globally, a blockchain company that is connecting diagnostic manufacturers directly to individuals, and they're doing it in testing for COVID. They brought the COVID case down quite a bit, count down quite a bit at a very large university, Clemson University. And then a startup that built a platform capability for adolescent minors. They do work in 4 or 5 states across the United States. And we kind of took what they have in the revenue stream they had and raised some money and actually built capabilities around it, which we think can enable holistic wellness and health for those adolescent minors in that state, and also be used for vaccine distribution, the collection of adverse reaction events from individuals that receive the vaccine, and optimizing kind of how the vaccine is distributed, whether it's within the state or across the entirety of the United States. So that's kind of one half of what I've been doing. I've also been working with the Department of Defense, evaluating venture-backed startups as it relates to some of the national security missions that exist across the United States. So it's been a really interesting ride since August 29th when I left. And, after just kind of taking the month of October off and trying to learn that third grade math.
Yeah, I tell you, I started laughing because I know you and I know your behavior and how much time you spend at work. But it sounds like you've got like 3 or 4 plates now up in the air and all these different projects, which is phenomenal. And they're always geared around, helping people and the preservation, of our society, which is, I applaud you for that.
Thanks, Brian. There's so much change happening right now. If you're a leader, whether you're a leader in healthcare, whether you're a leader in a technology startup, I think there's really like 3 areas you're going to want to focus in on. 1, how do you secure your network? 2, how do you receive, parse, curate, and share data in a secure manner and ensure the integrity of that data throughout the life of each of those actions, right? And then you're going to want computational horsepower to do analysis in real time. The example that I always give is Can you imagine if you could in real time predict the mutations of COVID-19 and the way it's going to change by taking into account environmental data, the genomic structure of the pathogen itself, and then having that computational horsepower and some adverse reaction insights to actually look at that at a zip code level throughout the United States? That would be powerful. So when, I felt like I was given a really unique opportunity when I left government to really go and explore some of the most cutting edge technologies in these different segments. And if you do that, one of the things you can start to do, and this is what I do when everybody else is asleep, is start to think about how can you bring those technologies together to fundamentally transform an industry, for our kids, for your kids and for my kids, so that when they're our age, they can live a better life, they can live a healthier life, they can drive better outcomes for our grandkids. And so that's kind of, I've been trying to spread myself out so that I could really create that view. And it's been a lot of fun.
I love it. And I just noticed in the backdrop, and I probably should have said this when we were first getting ready, but you have a wonderful picture right behind you from one of your children. And then to the left of you, I noticed your traditional signatory whiteboard, which neither one of us have ever left home without one, right? I mean, they're either strapped to our backs or under our cars or something. So it's great to see that you're still doing this, but from your home office there. So that's wonderful, Jose.
Yeah, no, thank you. We've actually, this is probably a little haphazard for an interview like this, but we've actually been learning how to paint as well.
Oh, wow. Look at that. That's great.
So the ones that are less clear are me, and the ones that are more clear are my beautiful daughters. So, yeah, it's been a good ride. I think that, one of the other things that I've been trying to do, try to explain, quantum computing to one of your kids. And if you can explain it to one of your kids, you can explain it to anybody. And let me tell you how I explain it to them. Because this quantum simulation company that I've been working with, it's called Entanglement, has been absolutely fascinating. I said to my son the other day, if you flip a coin, it can land on heads or tails, right, son? And he said, yeah. I'm like, so there's only two options, right? So in normal computing, you have 0 and you have 1. But if you spin a coin, right, you don't know if it's going to land on heads or tails, and it's not flipping over and over in real time. Imagine if you could calculate the likelihood that it would be heads or tails at every moment that the coin is spinning in a circle. That's what quantum computing is. That's why it allows you to be that much more accurate, because you're getting that insight in real time via each revolution. And so I think that it's important to try to explain things in as simple manner as possible. And they give me a great ability to kind of test out how I explain things. Plus, it always makes the family happy if you're engaging, if you're keeping them mentally engaged versus them torturing you.
Yeah, but what's really cool is that your kids know exactly what you do because of those educational lessons. So they won't be talking to others and go, "Hey, my he does a lot of cool stuff." So, hey, let's dive into some of these questions that folks were, thinking of and kind of pinged me about when I announced that I was going to have this meeting with you. So we talked about what you're doing now. I love hearing about this quantum computing piece. Well, I want to go back to that a little bit later, probably at the end of this. But I want to ask you a couple of core questions, like, what activities happened at HHSIT during the pandemic? Were there any lessons learned that you could share with everybody from an audience perspective? And keep in mind, the folks that are viewing you here are not just within the U.S. It is a global reach with Bright Talk and our strategic relationship with them.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. And I would say a couple of things that I want to hammer in on in terms of lessons learned. First and foremost, if you look at the United States, it's a highly fragmented market from a healthcare perspective, right? So visibility becomes extremely difficult. And in order to have visibility when you're talking about a pandemic like we're dealing with right now, you have to understand a demand signal. I can't hammer that enough. You're seeing it on the news right now. How many millions of vaccines have been shipped and how many millions of vaccines have gone into a human being's arm? And we beat this up big time in June and said, what is the demand signal? You are not shipping, if you're a hospital system, if you're a state, if you're a smaller country, you are not shipping to a fixed location. You're shipping to a fixed location where people live, and people will go to different places within that community, within that zip code, to get a COVID-19 vaccine. And in a place like the United States, maybe only 60% of the people are predisposed to say, yes, I want a vaccine, which means you have to have an understanding of what that demand signal is in real time, because the worst thing that you can do is ship a pallet of vaccines to a zip code within the state or the country that you're living in and not have all those vaccines be used and have to throw it away. So I think the first thing is engagement with the local community, engagement with NGOs and community organizations to actually create a demand signal, an understanding of who wants the vaccine. And in order to do that, you need to be able to create a digital identifier for an individual. An individual needs to be able to click on a link, create a secure digital identifier for themselves where they say, look, I got 3 kids. I want to get the vaccine. I live in this zip code, and I'd like to go to CVS or Walgreens, which are both really close to my house. That's going to make you more effective at inoculating the population that you serve. It's also going to give you a direct form of communication with that population. And in the United States, especially the way the healthcare segment is, and then kind of this idea that we have free and open speech and all the mediums that you can receive insight and information for, empowering the individual with that information on their person to consent to receiving information, sharing adverse reaction insights, and then being communicated with so that they can get their first vaccine and their follow-on vaccine is extremely important. So for all the states in the United States, I encourage you to go and invest in that infrastructure, partner with somebody that can deliver that infrastructure to you so that you have that visibility, because the COVID-19 disease in and of itself is one of the most what it proves is that a disease can be rapidly transmitted from person to person, and it's mutating every 2 weeks. And if we don't get 75% of the U.S. population vaccinated, it's going to continue to spread. So I think the other thing is about moving to cloud. And I think that the key thing is don't go and then kind of knock down the spider web of all the legacy IT systems you have and try to re-platform everything. Number one, it takes too long. Number two, it's too much cultural change if you think about all the systems. Figure out a way that you can invest in sitting in the middle of the spider web and actually collecting data from systems that are already sharing it, or receiving insights from systems that may not be sharing it but that are open to sharing it. And I say that at HHS, within a 5-day period of time, we built the largest public health surveillance system in the history of the nation. And what we were able to do is collect data from all 50 states, all 6 territories, 15,000 nursing homes, 8,000 hospitals. And we didn't go and try to recreate all the systems that exist. We connected with the systems that existed so that we could receive the data. We spun up portals rapidly to receive new data insights that we may need that we weren't receiving before. And anytime you're responding in a pandemic like this, anytime that people are in need, that creates a lot of change. It's going to create a lot of pressure. People are going to be upset. It's going to be difficult. The best thing to do is find a way that you can fit into the spider web that already exists. Yeah. So that you can create action. And I think the last thing, guys, is look, nation states have no mercy. Okay. And I want to be really kind of just direct with you on this. A nation state will have no mercy. The new normal is large scale nation state cyber efforts. In particular, I experienced them personally against the United States. Some of the largest cyber events in the history of this nation for commercial or the private sector repeatedly. And they weren't focused on shutting down our ability to operate. They were focused on getting access to our data. They're focused on getting visibility into what we're doing. And so if you're a healthcare system out there and you think you're going to build your own kind of cybersecurity capabilities, you're probably wrong, because it's going to be really difficult to compete with a nation state. And I want to give you just kind of one example, and I'm being general, but I'm framing it exactly around what we experienced. At HHS, if we were a house, like if we were a giant home, we had 1 million doors and windows to actually get in and out of our house. Those are ports within an IT system. We would get scanned maybe 300 million times a day. Wow. During the cyber event, we experienced the largest cyber event in the history of the United States, public or private sector. We were scanned 6.4 billion times in 18 hours.
So, say that again, 6.4 billion?
in a period of 18 hours, up from an average of 300 million. And the focus was to degrade our ability to function, degrade our ability to operate, but it was also focused on getting access to our data, being able to create identity so that you could get access to our systems from a VPN perspective. And when you have a bunch of people working from home, and so data flows, egress and inbound and egress are different than they were historically because everybody's working from home, everybody's working different hours. It's an opportune time to do that. The healthcare system in the United States, no matter how big you are, even if you're as large as someone like United Health, you're not going to be able to build a modern health internet to defend yourself from a nation state attack. You guys need to band together and invest in creating a HIPAA-enabled internet with connectivity so that you can pool your resources to defend yourself against an effort that large. And if that's not number one priority and for the CEO of a healthcare system, hospital system, insurer, then you're putting yourself at significant risk because data is the new oil, and there are folks that are actively trying to access it and actively trying to access your networks.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of ransomware attacks now happen, Jose, within the hospitals and healthcare systems, throughout the United States, where individuals, the actors will shut down an organization's systems and not let them operate, and then put an actual certain denomination out there to actually then give, that hospital the means to go back to full operation. So I hear you. I can't even fathom how to deal with 6.4 million billion intruders and actors hitting you all at once. That's that's beyond normal. So, and do you believe that intensified because of COVID solely, or do you think that there was intention to obtain clinical research or what was the driver for that?
It's pure speculation, but this is pure speculation on my part. But the first of 7 events that we experienced occurred around 15 March. I think it was actually exactly 15 March, and it was literally the day before the entirety of the U.S. federal government went on telework as a result of COVID. And I think it was an opportune time. Like I said, inbound and egress data flows within the HHS network were going to change significantly. We're one of the largest internet surface areas on the face of the earth. There was a very much a focus on our large data sets, which would imply a focus on either clinical trial data or maybe adverse reaction data that we were collecting. And I think it was as a direct result to COVID and a direct result to understanding if we had a solution. I think that the cyber events will continue. And I think that if you don't have a strategy from a network security perspective, and that strategy does not involve pooling resources with other organizations, and or creating a HIPAA compliant internet with a group of organizations so that you can secure and defend yourself, I think that you're going to fall behind. And I just want to kind of point this out because I talked a little bit about ingesting, parsing, curation, sharing of data with integrity. All those things are very important, but you got to have a solution for identity access management, authentication, and credentialing so that machine endpoints and human endpoints can get access to your network. We are very close, and there are many of the systems, healthcare providers that are on the phone and hospital systems that are kind of watching this are probably very close to this, to IoT-enabled networks where there'll be more machine endpoints accessing your network than human endpoints. And if you're not thinking through how do you secure them, how do you create secure identifiers to give them access, if you're not thinking that through now, you're going to fall behind. You're not going to be able to compete. You're not going to be able to deliver care. You're not going to be able to compete in a modern telehealth environment. That's right around the corner. So if you're investing for the future, you ought to be focused on those things.
Good advice. I appreciate that. Let's talk about clinical trials a little bit. What do you think the clinical trial landscape is going to look like after this COVID experience? Do you see an enhancement? Do you see more money and investment going in from the federal government? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that the pandemic has shown us is the importance of being able to run clinical trials very rapidly. And I'm going to kind of frame this for you from memory. So when we looked at the clinical trial process, there was something like 20 or 25 different softwares used to facilitate clinical trials. Right. I think that's going to change. I think the connectivity to the end consumer, the person volunteering for the clinical trial, the ability for them to say, yeah, I consent to volunteering for the clinical trial. Yes, I'm going to create a digital identifier and I want you to communicate with me in this way. And for the organization to actually stand up a commercial cloud environment with encrypted endpoints for human and machine endpoints, so that they can collect that data and interface with the individual that is saying, yeah, I'll be a part of the clinical trials, becomes extremely important. The more data you have, the faster you can execute clinical trials. And the fastest way to get more data is to take the distance between whoever's running the clinical trials and the individual themselves and make it as short as possible, make it as secure as possible within federal law. So I think that the investment at a macro level from HHS and in creating a shift in the industry so that can occur will be significant. I also think that if you're a large pharmaceutical company out there, and in our case, we collected something like 225 different data sets, which were a representation of about 6 billion data elements, which I would call environmental data, right, around the United States. You're not going to go out and invest in that on your own anymore. That's a significant fixed cost in your balance sheet. If you and your competitors are all collecting those same data sets, go and invest in an organization that collects that for you, that's focused on servicing each of you, so you can lower your fixed costs and you can focus your resources on supervised and unsupervised machine learning as one example, and maybe collecting new data sets that you think are important to get you through the clinical trial process faster. I think you'll see grant money and investment by large pharmaceutical companies focused in on facilitating that. I also think that within healthcare systems, you're going to see the idea of, how do we create a digital endpoint related to a human being and collect passive health data from them if they in fact choose to consent to sharing it. I'd love to wear a sensor under my watch, and after I get my vaccine, passively share data anytime I'm connected to the internet on O2 saturation levels, as well as the other indicators that are being measured to determine the effectiveness of the vaccine. So I think from a hospital side, from a healthcare system perspective, you're going to see an investment to enable that behavior. And from a pharmaceutical perspective, you'll see investment to lower their fixed costs so they can invest in opportunities to generate higher margins with some more cutting edge technology and different data sets. And I think you'll see HHS and the federal government support those investments activities through grants, but planning now to have a vision for that and really thinking through how that changes your organization without eliminating the spider web, fitting into the existing set of systems you have is the single most important thing you can do to prepare for that moment.
That's great. I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball, and that is, I would love for you to talk a little bit about patient safety and the importance of investing in the right systems to prevent sepsis. And I didn't tee that up with you before, but I would love for you to put that on the table, with the audience here, the importance.
Yeah, I mean, sepsis is an interesting thing, and I'll share a very personal story. So my mom almost died of sepsis. And she died because of a problem that she developed, overtaking prescription drugs that significantly weakened her immune system. And she became septic. The rural hospital that we went to felt that it was pneumonia, and they put her on an IV drip, said she'd be better in 12 hours. Now, luckily, my brother-in-law is a paramedic, and he said, that is not a pneumonia. You need to get her moved to like a larger hospital system in a city. And when we went to that larger hospital system, I sat with the doctor, and I started to talk to him about, I was Googling it. There's 7 or 8 different types of sepsis. So why can't we treat this? Like, there's medicine for each strand. And I'm not a medical doctor. And he said, Jose, you're right. But to find out what strand it is, we have to kind of send the data out for a test. and it takes 2 to 3 days to get it back. And so what we're doing is we're treating her with every medicine that we have. And if there's 7 strands of sepsis, 6 of the medicines are actually killing her. And our goal is to keep her alive long enough so we can get the result back and treat her with the right medicine. And lucky enough, she was in a full coma. 90% of her organs stopped functioning other than machine aided. But we got the results back, and we were able to give her the proper medicine that she needed to recover from sepsis. But this was about 2 weeks before I started working at HHS in my first role. And what I realized very quickly is that, investment in the ability to rapidly exchange data and breaking down the cultural barriers that allow for data to be exchanged more freely to focus on saving patients is extremely important. A patient lying and dying in bed, not because you can't get a test result back for 3 or 4 days because the technology that's being used to share data is arcane, and because the data sharing culture in this environment isn't kind of where it should be, is just unacceptable. And so, I think there's a number of people that probably are impacted by that in a number of different ways. I know that folks in Pennsylvania have the same issue with Lyme disease. And focusing on that investment will certainly save lives and improve health outcomes for a number of people. I think it's really an example of why investing in data sharing and investing in security for how data is shared and the tools so that healthcare systems can protect data that they don't want shared, but share enough information so that analysis can be performed, is a way that you'll see the industry modernize. And I think it's extremely important for patient outcomes.
I love how that story shaped your passion. And I'm familiar with it from our initial discussions from the days when I was at Oracle and working with you within HHS. And I'm telling you that your passion has grown exponentially within this market, and literally love the fact that those types of events have shaped you to provide betterment for everybody. But I didn't want to miss that moment, and because it just hearing your passion throughout this whole conversation, it reminded me of it. And the other thing I want to bring up, because folks were asking me about this when I stated that we were going to have this discussion with one another, is around supply chain. If any human being has touched more federal dollars from a procurement standpoint, it's this guy, either through GSA or through HHS. And so what I would love for you to do is tell the folks out there, where do you see things going within the future regarding supply chain and procurement? I do want you to talk a little bit about the solutioning around blockchain, of course, within HHS. That was a seminal and capstone event. And then, address, where vendors, should target and focus going forward as well.
Yeah. So I think that from a supply chain perspective, you're going to see a massive shift in the manufacturing of microelectronics. One of the things that you have to do if you want to secure your supply chain, whether you're a company, whether you're a hospital system, is you have to have visibility in the second and third and fourth tier entities that are actually doing work to support the supply chain. Now, that may be an input, right? That may be an input, some type of commodity input that helps you make a drug. That may be a software that actually is helping you analyze data. That may be a group of individuals that are working at your manufacturing facility and helping to facilitate the development of an IoT-enabled device that's going to be connected to a network. So investing in creating visibility into the supply chain at the third and fourth tier supplier level is extremely important. You want to know that there's a couple of software developers in the middle of Romania that are developing a part of the software solution that is being used for your IoT-enabled thermometer. And you want to have that type of visibility, right? I think the other thing about supply chain that becomes extremely important is that when you're manufacturing products, when you're using microelectronics, you want to know where those microelectronics are actually being put together and built. A couple of years ago, and I'll give this as an example because it was very public. A couple of years ago, there were tiny chips found in tires that were manufactured in a country around the world that could be turned on remotely at any time to get an understanding of how those tires were being used in this country. They were unseeable to the human eye. It's very important that you get to the bottom of understanding from a supply chain perspective where that part of the tire was manufactured, how that chip might have been embedded in that tire. So I think you're going to see a shift in the microelectronics industry from where microelectronics are currently manufactured to this hemisphere. And I think in the AI world, that's extremely important because the software that is going to be built to enable artificial intelligence needs to be built within countries, within states where the values of the state of the country align with the values of the consumers that are actually using those devices, right? As a consumer, if artificial intelligence is going to be used to understand my behavior, my wants, and my needs, then it ought to be used and it ought to be developed, written, and maintained by someone that shares those same values and understanding. So I think the idea of the last, everybody talks about the fact that globalization occurred over the last 50 years. I actually don't think that's true. I think the centralization of manufacturing over the last 40 years has been significant. It has been so significant, we refer to it as globalization, that has significantly lowered costs for manufacturing. And even though those costs may have taken jobs out of certain parts of the world, initially because of the cost reduction, they created other opportunities where those jobs were lost. But I think now you're truly going to see globalization occur, and you're going to see globalization occur on the basis of connecting individual with input. And I'm going to give you one example of this, okay? And I'm not a makeup expert, but L'Oreal did a really interesting proof of concept with blockchain technology in another country around the world where 80% of their cost for developing makeup is the R&D process. And they got rid of it completely. And they connected the individual and their wants, their needs, the things that they like via a QR code directly with L'Oreal. They went and sourced the inputs so that they could make lipstick that met the needs of the person that was responding to their prompts and their questions. It significantly cut out costs. But the values of that person were directly aligned with the product that was created and ultimately shipped to them. I think it's a really good example of the changes you're going to see in supply chain, and that will drive shifts. And if I were like a very large healthcare organization or pharmaceutical company, I would be investing in and partnering with the microelectronics manufacturers who are going to build the IoT-enabled devices that are going to power IoT-enabled health service delivery. I'd be co-investing in it. I'd want to understand as much about that business process as possible. I would want to embed security requirements into the development. I would want to have an understanding of every single person that was working on those devices. And because the success of that is going to allow you to deliver better health outcomes for the consumers, the end patients that you serve. And the risk of that is a risk that you're accepting when you start to do business and deliver health outcomes in that way. So it's a really exciting time, but supply chain is no longer about distributing products. It's about everything that goes into the creation of something and everybody that touches it and having that visibility. And that's a different way of thinking about it. And it's kind of like the change that we talked about earlier in distribution. You're no longer distributing something to a fixed location. You have to imagine that you're distributing something to an individual that's actually going to use it. And you have to have knowledge of how many folks are going to use it and how many folks aren't going to use it. But you also have to have visibility into every single input that goes into manufacturing that product. Let's assume that it's a vaccine in this case. If that's not top of mind and you're a CEO in the healthcare space, I think you're already falling behind.
Great inputs. Tell me about what you did with blockchain within HHS.
Yeah, one of the things we wanted to do with blockchain technology is we wanted to empower 20, 30, 40,000 people within health and human services. We wanted to give them access to data, in real time that they didn't have. So imagine that you have 5 or 6 different systems that collect data. And I'll give you just a real simple example that just collect procurement data, right? Imagine you have 5 or 6 organizations that do procurement, and each of them have their own data set. Now, Brian works for organization A and I work for organization B. Do you think Brian gets a benefit from looking at the historical pricing on Oracle that he spent on from organization A as well as organization B? Absolutely. Yeah, he probably does. So what if we could use a technology to pull together all of that data in real time, and we could tag it. We could tag it so that we could ensure that any change to that data element was recorded in real time. So I'm going to go and get the total number of hospital beds in South Carolina that are filled with COVID patients. The county in South Carolina is going to submit that information to me. I'm going to ingest it. And then I'm going to create a record on a blockchain of every time it's parsed, every time it's curated, and every time that it's shared. And I want that record because I want to understand how different people are using that data for decision making. But I also want integrity in the underlying data set. Blockchain technology actually gives you that integrity. It gives you transparency into what has occurred before, whether it's the purchase of Oracle software or whether it's the total number of patients and hospital beds in some county in South Carolina. And that is very empowering when you're trying to make a decision. I think for science, it's important because as people start to do experiments with those data sets, they now have a record of every step that they took that's auditable in real time that can either present or not present the outcome that they felt that they accomplished. That becomes very powerful. I'm going to give you one real world example, and I won't tell you the state. During the COVID response, we actually were collecting data from all the states, as I'm sure you heard, related to COVID case count, bed, ventilator usage. And one of the states said, hey, Jose, you guys say, and I'm making up the numbers so you can't guess the state. One of the states said, hey, Jose, you said we had 230 hospitals in our state, but we only have 200. And remember, I have a blockchain in place embedded in the system. I'm tracking all the data as I receive it, every time it's curated, every time it's parsed, whoever's accessing it, whoever it has been shared with. When it's shared, is somebody changing the underlying data set to make an argument? I'm time series and stamping and recording those actions throughout the ecosystem. Right. So the state says, hey, there's only 200 hospitals in our network. And I said, well, what happened to the other 30? And they said, well, they're all shut down. And we said, well, for the last 30 days, those 30 hospitals have submitted data to us almost every day.
Oh, wow.
So they're not shut down, because I've never met an institution that's shut down that still wants to be regulated. Right. And then we went back in time with them and we started to be able to show them, like, this is the data that they submitted. We don't think it's somebody that's making this up because there's different numbers each and every day. We can track when they log in. We can track the IP that they're submitting it from. That tool becomes very powerful from a transparency perspective. Now, I'm going to say it's the same state, but it was a different state. We had another state, right, say, hey, the data's all wrong. The denominator's all wrong. You guys messed it up. It was, who knows, maybe you double entered it, maybe you manipulated it. Okay, well, let's go back and look at the immutable record that exists on the blockchain. And when we went back and looked at it, we said, this person from your organization actually logged in 2 times on Sunday. He submitted the same data set. But the second time he submitted it, he just backdated it 5 days. That's an immutable record. Time series stamp. That's powerful when you're making decisions. And you can see how that capability can be applied in the healthcare space. Now, the last thing, and I'm really excited about this, and there's certain networks that have sprouted up across the United States that are really interesting. And what they're saying is, geez, if we create a digital identifier for each other, the business units that trade with one another, think of a payer and a provider, right? University. And then we start to add in consumers and we create a digital identifier for them. We could significantly lower the cost of administrative transactions and cut out overhead, because we would have trust in that digital identifier. We would have a mechanism to execute transactions in real time in an automated fashion, because we standardized digital identities that in a public-private key infrastructure that was acceptable to all within the ecosystem. That's going to drive significant value for the consumer, because things go quicker. It also lowers costs. lower cost to the consumer. It makes it go faster. You're much more rapidly able to service the health patient. And then it gives you more dollars, more free cash flow to invest in the capabilities that are actually going to save lives. And I've been working with that organization. I'm really excited about it. It allows you to share in the ability to lower cost, but manage your own risk on your own balance sheet without being bought out by a larger organization and without having to take on all that debt onto your balance sheet. It provides you flexibility as a healthcare insurer or as a provider of services. And that is extremely powerful. I do think that that's the future of healthcare globally. Who knows, maybe I'll be engaged in some of that in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. I'm intrigued. I mean, I was writing while looking at you, like I need to be speaking with him about this. So hey, I know
we would love to have the Center of Health Affairs involved, Brian.
We would love to have that conversation, as you know. So I always wrap these up with kind of a T-ball opportunity, and I call it Magic Wand. And so, the premise of it actually came from one of the mentors of my past, who was Dick Davidson at the American Hospital Association, and he would always, in meetings this way, and ask people a very provocative question, which is, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? And in this case, I think what I would like to hear from you is the magic wand around changing the focus of leaders throughout the world around data needs, demand to enable quicker, faster decision making, which is everything you've been opining on, and then everything resulting from COVID-19, especially around the vaccinations as well as the upcoming therapeutics. So with that, I want to thank you, but let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question.
You have a powerful magic wand in your hand right now.
Yeah,
it is. Good.
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. Brian, I think that, and this is going to happen, and there'll be 30, 40% of folks that see this that will disagree with me. And I'm telling you, this is going to happen. It's going to happen a lot faster than most people think. What COVID-19 has proven is the United States right now is a giant blinking light to the rest of the world. Now, we can argue about the validity of our data, and it's not all uniform and it's messy, but we are a giant blinking light to the rest of the world that says, if you want to invest in healthcare, you want to invest in a place where you can quantify risk. And how do you quantify risk? You quantify risk with data. And we also have experienced one of the largest anti-vax propaganda efforts in the history of the world, launched against our nation from a cyber perspective. So there's a lot of people that are going to continue to get sick in the United States. So investing in the computational capability and an understanding of a demand signal to manage those two things, which are happening in front of your eyes right now, is of extreme importance. And what do I mean by that? Let's imagine you have a city of 100,000 people and you don't have a demand signal. You just ship a bunch of vaccines to that city. Well, let's say 50% of the people slowly get a vaccine because they can't figure out the avenue to get it from, because they weren't communicated with so that they could say that they would go to CVS or they would go to the hospital system. And Tony Fauci says until you get to 75%, the disease itself is going to continue to spread. So you're going to have outbreaks across that city in the illness. And those people that get sick are going to need a therapeutic. They're going to need a hospital bed. They may need a ventilator. And then when they recover, 25% of them are going to go and get a vaccine. Are you investing as a healthcare community and creating real-time visibility so that you can get people to register with a digital identity, so that you can communicate with those that want the vaccine, and ask folks that don't want the vaccine, say, hey, just tell us you don't want it so that we understand demand and we know where to ship it. Just do that at a minimum. Are you investing in that capability so that you can move, whether you're a healthcare system or state, so that you can move therapeutics and you can move vaccines around the state so that you can actually help people in real time, so that you can get as many shots in arms as possible in real time? And I would say that I don't see the platform capabilities that exist in the marketplace, and I don't see the effort being put into creating that demand signal. Think of the ice bucket challenge that went viral on Facebook, where people created a need for people to do this ice bucket challenge. I don't see that occurring. And if somebody is going to do that, whether you're a state or a hospital, and you're not doing that with a digital identifier, and you're not doing that with some type of validation and verification of that digital identifier right before you give the shot, then you're never going to be able to execute the distribution, which you're seeing play out in front of you at a national level across the United States right now. The second thing is the number one supercomputer in the world, okay, can do the computational analysis to move PPE, taking into account traffic patterns, taking into account humidity, taking into account need, in 3 days. They can do the computations to understand where PPE and therapeutics and vaccines should go across the entirety of the United States in 3 days. Okay. That's a static data set after 3 days. Well, Entanglement, this company that I'm working with, they can do that in every 27 minutes in real time. And I think so the second thing you're going to see is an investment of supercomputer capabilities to understand dynamic demand signals so that in real time you can route PPE supplies, vaccine and therapeutics across the United States and within a state to meet the need of the end consumer. That is a fundamental shift in healthcare. I think COVID-19 demands that shift occurs. Why? You're not going to get into Yankee Stadium unless you can prove you've had a vaccine or had a test before the game so that they know you're not going to be spreading the illness, right? You're going to actually have to be able to carry that around in your person. Why not ask that same individual whether or not they're interested in being a part of clinical trials? Whether or not they want to register and sign up for a vaccine? Why not create that record on that digital endpoint that they carry everywhere around with them so that you can kind of communicate and update them, whether you're the state, federal government, or the hospital system that they work in? And if you're going to do that, you better have the supercomputing capabilities to actually deliver the needed services and support in real time. And the last thing I want to leave you with, and this is the thing I'm most interested in, the genetic structure of COVID-19 to me is so interesting. It mutates every 2 weeks. And I know nothing about genetics, but I know it mutates every 2 weeks. Can you imagine using that same supercomputing capability to actually simulate how the disease is going to change in real time? Can you imagine being able to jog alongside nature, to be able to jog alongside a pathogen that you can't see and simulate how it's going to change? How does that change how you develop drugs? How does that change how you develop therapeutics? How does that change the importance in collecting adverse reaction insights directly from an individual who consents to share it, and they have access to share it directly from their mobile device? That fundamentally changes the world. That makes my kids safer, and that makes your kids safer. We can argue as to whether or not that should occur, whether that should be driven by providers, whether that should be driven by payers. But I'm telling you, it's going to happen, and it's going to be driven by consumers. And the U.S. market over the next 5 years for healthcare will become a consumer market. We're 55% of global healthcare GDP around the world. We are a monopoly. We want to continue to deliver value and invest in that. And we're 22% of U.S. GDP on a consumption basis when you talk about healthcare. This is a cornerstone of what we stand for as a nation. And I think we're 18 months away from the future that I just described in real time. And I think you'll see states in the nation actually start doing, the most aggressive states in healthcare systems. I actually know of one state and healthcare system that have actually agreed to do that today. And I applaud them. And I think you'll continue to see it happen. And if you don't think it's true, you already fell behind, because it's coming.
That's great insights. I want to thank you, Jose, for joining today. And I mean, you always wow and amaze me. But man, oh man, it's phenomenal what comes out of your noggin, and I love you for it. And I think the web so world of you. And looking forward to continuing our relationship. And I hope everybody out there, if you've got additional questions, feel free to relay them to me, and I'll share them directly with Jose. But I'm sincerely appreciative of your time today, Jose. So thank you.
It was an honor to be on, and great to see you again. I got to figure out what water you're drinking, Brian, because every time I see you, you look younger, and I feel like I'm just getting older. So just shoot me an email.
But it's not the case. Much love to you. You take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.